What is a man? A miserable pile of secrets. That's probably going to be in the new show, isn't it? Crap, I think I might have to watch the rest of it just so I actually have criticisms and I'm not just turned off by the concept of it. I love Rondo of Blood and Symphony of the Night so much. I kind of don't like that they're not being done properly. That they're being done without Dracula. Who's gonna say what is a man? A miserable pile of secrets.
Is anyone there?
Oh, you should watch more than 2 episodes of Spy Family. Spy Family is great. Although I'm surprised the first 2 episodes didn't hook you. They're pretty strong. Like, I think they're really good introductions to the 2 characters, and it ends with kind of a bang. It's kind of a slice of life anime though, and you might not really be into that kind of thing in general, so that's also understandable. I do recommend Chainsaw Man though. It's like the opposite type of wholesome that Spy Family is. And no, it's not that I feel like I need to finish it just because. I feel like I need to finish it just because I know I'm going to be talking a lot of about it because I really didn't like those first 2 episodes. Like, I've done reviews on the Castlevania show. I reviewed season 3 for Geeks and Gamers, so I probably should not be criticizing the new entry if I haven't like actually given it a chance. But I don't like anything I've seen of it so far. I don't know if maybe Alucard entering the picture might make things better. I guess they kind of did for season 2. Like season 2 of Castlevania I think is stronger than season 1, but really season 1 of 2 are one season. Season 1 is the first 3 episodes of the first season, really. Well, I mean, the contrivance is the setup. The idea is that like they're in a situation where they could not have picked any more perfect people for each other than each other, and yet it like the only person who knows that is the little girl, who's because she's psychic. I don't know. I like that. I think that's it's an interesting dynamic because her whole motivation is I just want a family. And I think also the inconsistency in the character, if you're talking about like Twilight, feel like, oh no, literally left her fingerprints at the scene of the crime. I mean, it seems like the crime detection capabilities are not quite what they are in our world. There's a lot of things that Lloyd gets away with that are a little fantasy-ish, but this is a sort of anime Cold War, so I don't know. I'm willing to suspend my disbelief a little bit on stuff like that. Like I'm not like, oh, they didn't clean up her fingerprints, because we haven't even heard any about anyone looking into yours killings. Never. Like, it doesn't really come up, at least in the first season. I mean, she's kind of worried that her brother is gonna find out about her, but that's it. It's more she's worried that her brother will find out that she doesn't actually have a husband. It's odd to apply that standard of writing to what it's trying to do, because like, do the rules make sense within themselves? It's like, what is this world concerned with? There's plenty of action movies in which the police could definitely be way more on the ball than they actually are, but you know, it's like you gotta be along for the ride to an extent. Now it becomes a bigger problem when you're doing that in a universe that already has set rules, because it's like, okay, well, the rules need to make sense with the stuff that came before it, doesn't it? Otherwise, like, what are we doing here? Because if we don't have consistent rules with the previous entries, then there's inconsistencies within the. What, One Punch Man passes just fine? I mean, the power levels in that, like One Punch Man's power, Saitama's power alone, and the origin for it is a gigantic leap of, yeah, we're just along for the ride for this, because you don't become invincible if you do like a pretty reasonable calisthenics and running routine every day. I mean, yeah, like the idea is like it's every day and he didn't take a break, whereas everyone eventually takes an off day, but if you didn't, you would become a superhuman. Like, that's not very realistic, but it's funny, and it's kind of fun for that world to have that as the main character's backstory. I think that it's difficult to apply real world laws to stylized anime worlds unless they start having inconsistency within themselves. Now, if we start seeing a whole side arc about Yor's brother, yeah, well, I mean, you don't even know like what Yor's brother's deal is and everything. Yeah, I mean, you've been introduced to that character, but he is a cop, He's like one of the Secret Service police in their world, I guess. In the oh god, not Westalis is Lloyd's country. I forget what her country's called. Anyways, it doesn't really matter. It's the fictionalized Eastern Europe, like Russia, basically Soviet Union. He's like a secret police for them, but her concern isn't that he's gonna find out that she's killing people as a hired assassin for what's effectively the mafia, I guess. Like she's a mercenary. She's worried that he's gonna find out that she's lying about having a husband and a normal life, because as her brother, that's kind of what he cares about. That she's like gotten married and has a good man beside her. I don't know. I like the premise because that on its face is kind of ridiculous. Why isn't she worried about the killings? It's because it's like a comedy show, right? Like and it is. It's very much intended as an action comedy. It's like Mr. and Mrs. Smith, the anime, but it's I think better than Mr. and Mrs. Smith, to be honest. Not that Mr. and Mrs. Smith is bad, it's just, I don't know, it's not great. It was pretty much exactly what it sounded like it would be. It was Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt in a spy movie where they're husband and wife. The premise tells you everything you need to know about the movie, but it was fine. Well, I think it's like you got to consider what you're rating in the writing, and it depends on the seriousness of the material. I don't know that saying that Zoolander has a lot of world-building inconsistencies is an accurate criticism of that movie, but I mean it's an easier one to identify because it's more blatantly over-the-top farcical. It's going for being a silly kind of wacky world much more specifically, but if it's something like Star Wars, I don't really buy the like whatever, it's space magic, anything can work. Because it's like no, Star Wars is a universe that has rules. People know these rules. People have written books on these rules. They've obsessively gone over these rules and exactly how they work or might work. And even every time Lucas changed, it was like, oh, dude, come on, what the? How does this all make sense with everything that we've been studying since the 70s? Like now midichlorians have to factor into all of this, you know, like it does create issues when you start tweaking with things that are already established. And I think that Star Wars, for all of it's intended for children stuff, is pretty serious material. There's crazy things that go down in Star Wars that are not like kids stuff. And I think that it takes itself seriously enough throughout at least the entire original trilogy, and especially for the back half of the prequel trilogy. I mean, if anything, that took itself too seriously. At the same time, it's like, well, I mean, you know, those kind of came together as being actual stories. If you're talking about a world like, I'm just trying to think of something that's closer to being drama, but is still well within the realms of comedy that isn't just spy family. Give me one. Oh, Buffy. Buffy is actually a perfect example because, and actually a really good one to use because it is a world that has a lot of consistencies and that are developed over a pretty long number of stories. You know, like there's a lot of episodes of Buffy and Angel over which you can catalog this lore. Now, I'm not talking about going into comics and stuff. I know they're supposed to be canon and whatever, but I don't know. I've never read them. I don't know what happens in them, so I'm not really talking about that. Buffy is the kind of world where sometimes they will just throw new in, like, okay, now there's witches, okay, now there's werewolves, now there's military cyborgs. Like, how has the military been factoring into all this vampire stuff? Why don't they know anything about these vampires? And they did their best to be like, well, the military does know about them, and they're trying to just figure out what they can do with all this otherworldly. So they created a monster Frankenstein cyborg thing. But that doesn't necessarily mean that in the first season of Buffy, you would be like, oh, well, I mean, it's so stupid. Like, they're getting into fights in the park and no cops show up. It's like, well, yeah, but this is also, like, it's a vampire teen show, and it would be very expensive to be doing, like, showing cops showing up at every scene and having everything be a full-scale battle where Buffy's running from the police who are shooting at her, you know? Like, at a certain point, it's like, well, or we could bend the rules a bit. Or we could make it so that, yeah, okay, you get it. There would probably be cops here if this was real life. It's not real life. Here's the concessions you have to make. And I think there's a lot to be said about writing that gives you more or fewer of those concessions. Because the more you have to make, I think the closer to comedy you need to be. Like, you can't do a serious version of Austin Powers. And no, a serious version of Austin Powers is not James Bond. That is, James Bond is typically quite a bit more serious than Austin Powers ever was. And even in the Roger Moore era that you could argue is closest to being Austin Powers-ish, there were still stakes. You know, like, people still died. It wasn't just, hey, this is a lighthearted romp. Whereas in Austin Powers, everything is played for a joke. So when things happen that are really crazy, it's a lot easier to deal with it than in, like, Moonraker, which is a James Bond film in which kind of ridiculous stuff happened, or You Only Live Twice is another frequently brought up example, because it's the one where Sean Connery goes undercover as a Japanese man. Like, and, you know, there's weird stuff that happens in Bond, and it's weirder there because Bond is generally more serious. Now, is Bond the most serious, ultra-realistic spy thriller? Absolutely not. It would be silly to say so. But it takes itself a lot more seriously than Austin Powers. I mean, you can, sure. I mean, you can write something that's like very much a comedy world, but everything plays seriously. I think that you can't necessarily hold comedies or things that are intended to be more lighthearted, especially when they're dealing with things like Cold War era espionage and hired killings. Like, these are things that are very serious if they are being treated realistically. So if you're gonna have a like action comedy family show about spies and a sexy assassin lady and you know, cute kind of daughter person who also is psychic, like, not everything's going to be perfectly explainable within the laws of our physics, so they gotta sort of not necessarily physics, our reality, just all of our rules of reality, so they have to kind of forge their own reality. And as long as it's consistent within itself, I don't think there will be too much of an issue with it. Like I said, if we all of a sudden get a character in season 2 of Spy Family who is a CSI detective and goes out and solves crimes by, like, getting DNA evidence and fingerprint dusting and, you know, like, doing all the stuff that you would expect a cop to do in our modern world, then that would start creating a lot of issues, because it's like, okay, well, then why has your not already been captured? And I guess the only explanation you can give is, well, I mean, the cops are dirty, and the cops all know, or at least the cops sending people out, like the important cops in the equation, all know that Yor is a hired assassin, and the people she's killing, the government wants dead anyway, so they're told to look the other way. And I mean, hey, I don't know that doesn't happen. I mean, her brother, like I said, is basically a fed in their country. I mean, yeah, fair enough. Like, you don't need to be a fan of the writing of the show. I don't know that it's really fair to call it bad. I think there'd need to be a lot of qualifiers on that.